This morning we began a new sermon series entitled Love Letters. We'll be looking in the month of August at some of the writings from Paul to the churches. And so today our passage comes from Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 16. You'll see it there on the front of your Grow Pray study guide, and I invite you to hear now these words. I, therefore, the prisoner in the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope of your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in all. But each of us was given grace according to the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore it is said, when he ascended on high, he made captivity itself a captive. He gave gifts to his people. When it says he ascended, what does it mean but that he had also descended into the lower parts of the earth? He who descended is the same one who ascended far above the heavens so that he might fill all things. The gifts he gave were that some would be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up of the body of Christ, until all of us come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to maturity, to the measure of the full stature of Christ. We must no longer be children tossed to and fro, blown about by every wind of doctrine, by people's trickery, by their craftiness and deceitful scheming, but speaking the truth in love. We must grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body joined and knit together by every ligament with which it is equipped, as each part is working properly, promotes the body's growth in building itself up in love. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
When I was a youth minister, I took the church youth on a mission trip every summer. This is pretty customary in youth ministry. So, on different years, we did different things. One year, we went to North Carolina to help restore a church in a depressed community. One year, we went to Oklahoma following a tornado, and we built houses with Habitat for Humanity. After a hurricane in Florida, we roofed houses. 16-year-olds up on the roof is a great plan. We went to Washington State to work on a reservation through the ministry in our general denomination. But once every 4 years, I led a different kind of trip, a different kind of mission. I called it a disciples history tour. So here's what would happen. We would load up, at that time we had two 15-passenger vans, and we loaded about 20 kids and 4 adults in the 2 vans, and we would head to Nashville, where at that time the Disciples Historical Center was located. And we would do research. We would go down into the library, into the stacks, and we would get information about a lot of historical places in our denomination's history. We would do that research. From Tennessee, we would go to Kentucky, and we would visit Transylvania University, one of our disciples' colleges, and we would go to Cane Ridge, that famous meeting house of the disciples. From there, we would head up to Indianapolis to what we call the Tower of Power. That's the general offices of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and we would meet with the heads of all of the general ministries. Sit down with them in a room so they could tell us about the ministry work that they did. From Indianapolis, we would make our way down to Washington, D.C., and we would stay at National City Christian Church and do some work in D.C., and then down to North Carolina, where we would stay at Christ Mount, the National Conference Center for the Disciples of Christ, and finally back home It was a great trip. It was a lot of fun to do that. And it was a way for our youth to learn about their heritage as members of the Christian church. But it was a lot of living together. A lot. Significant miles were logged on the church van every day, and we slept in the same quarters on the floors of churches every night. We were always, it seemed, either loading or unloading vans with all of our stuff because we were always on the move. No more than one night in the same place as we traveled around. And those trips, they always started out with great excitement. The youth were so excited they would make t-shirts for each other. Without me leading them, they would make us trip t-shirts and design duffel bags so everybody could put their stuff in matching duffel bags, which was never a bad plan to have 24 people with the same exact bag. But they did it and they were excited about it. They would make seating charts each day so that the youth moved around and sat with different people every day, and they would plan games between the two vans with walkie-talkies. That was before your phone could do everything that it can do today. And so we could play Trivial Pursuit with Team Van 1 and Team Van 2 back and forth. It all went great. Every single time I did it, it went great until day 3. That's how long it took for the new van smell to wear off. And I mean literally wear off with all of us packed in there together. 20 teenagers, 4 adults crammed into these two 15-passenger vans, living together in really tight quarters for 7 days and 7 nights. And by day 4, the nice was wearing off. Grumpiness would begin to set in. By day 5, friends began to quarrel and say they might not be friends anymore over really stupid stuff too. And then by day 6, it was guaranteed that there would be a breakdown. Hopefully not of the van, but at least there would be a breakdown of somebody's emotional state. Usually I was the first. The kids would be fighting, the adults were wanting to drink, and I was crying. And then all of us were crying by the end of the trip. I can't take it anymore, people would say. This is too much closeness, too much living together. I want to scream. Everybody else is so stupid. Why can't we do it my way? If everybody would do my way, we would be just fine. And we would finally pull back into the church parking lot after 1,500 miles, and we'd unload the van in steely silence. All of us getting our own things and running as fast as we could to our own family car. Kids were never so happy to see their families. That after a youth mission trip, we'd head home to our families and we would pray that we didn't have to speak to or even see each other for a really good long while. Or at least until the next Sunday. Living together can be really hard. Let's face it, you don't have to have been on a van for a week with a bunch of teenagers to know what I'm talking about. We all have some kind of experiences with what I've described, because after all, we all have families. We've been on those family vacations. That's why they make movies called Vacation. Whatever, European vacation and Christmas vacation and family vacation. You know, if you have lived with a college roommate, that living together is hard. You know, if you have worked in an office, that sharing space with others can be difficult. And yes, sometimes it can feel that way at church too. If anyone has ever said to me, church is great, everybody loves everybody at church. Church is the one place where everybody always gets along. That's why I love church. I know right away, those are people who have never really invested in a church. If you get invested in a church, if you really get involved, after you've been there for a little while and maybe you've joined a study group and you've served on a ministry team and you've maybe been to a few congregational meetings or you get elected to the board. You've seen that curtain get pulled back. And you know that there really are disagreements in church over all kinds of things, over money and over which ministry should take priority over the color of the carpet and what to put in the nursery, because living together, even as a church, is difficult. Paul knew that. As a pastor, developer, Paul had started churches. He developed leaders for congregations and undergirded their life together on the foundation of Christ. And then Paul needed to move on so he could begin other churches and spread the gospel to new places. And eventually, as we know, he would end up in prison for this gospel work. But he kept in communication with these churches through the written letters that we see in our Bible. When an issue would come up, the leaders of a congregation would write to Paul and he would send instruction back to them. And you know, we have the tendency, I think, to look at Paul's ministry and to think of him as a great evangelist, spreading the gospel far and wide, and surely he did that. But I think his writing gives evidence for us that he was really at heart a pastor, a leader who loved his churches and who did what he could to guide them through whatever strife they were going through. We see that to the church in Ephesus, Paul was giving instruction. The letter is written to them from prison. You see that on the front. I, therefore, the prisoner in the Lord. Paul is in prison. The letter is written from there. And it must be a response to some issues that have arisen in the church. History, unfortunately, I think, did not record for us the church's letters to Paul. They didn't save those in history. It'd be really nice if they did. But they did give us Paul's responses, his pastoral letters back to the church. I wonder if the questions they had for Paul were something like this, if we could, just see their letters. What's our calling? What are we supposed to be doing? What are we supposed to do without you now that you're not here with us anymore to guide us? Who's in charge, Paul? Tell everybody to do it my way. I'm trying to lead over here, but these people in the church won't follow what I'm telling them to do. What's our priority anyway? In a world torn apart and divided, Paul, tell us, what are we supposed to do? Sounds like a letter that might be written today from churches. And to all of their questions, Paul writes back a pastoral love note. Y'all. Because in my head, Paul's Southern. Y'all. It's about unity. It's about unity. It's about being together and recognizing your common bonds. Church is not an us and them kind of thing. Church is a we together place. And yes, you're going to have different gifts. And what a boring place the church would be anyway if we all had the same gift. You probably wouldn't get very much done if everybody had the exact same gift. But your differences, your diversity is a gift from God. And it is for the building up of the body of Christ. Church, you're not finished yet. You've got some growing left to do. And here's how. You do it with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace. It's so nice and sing-songy. And it is so darn hard. Humility will take you a long way in living together. Gentleness and patience will be required. And to live together in the bonds of peace, you are going to have to bear with one another in love. And this is not some mushy, can't we all just get along and love everybody kind of writing. There's a true recognition that living together is difficult, that humans will disagree about how to live out the life of faith. But Paul reminds the church then, and he reminds the church today, that we are called to live our life in community. We are called to be one. Just look at how many times that word one is used. There is one body and one spirit, just as you were called to the one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, and who is above all and through all and in all. One and all. In other words, in and through the one God, you all are now one. But it's not about unity of thought. Because after all, that is not unity. It's uniformity. It's not about unity of thought or some political or theological ideology that everyone must adhere to in order to stay in the club. It's a biblical unity founded on Christ. That is so much deeper. And it takes all of us, different though we are, we need each other. And everything we do centers around Christ our Lord. This is the core value that our denominational founders believed in. When I took youth on trips, they heard it over and over again. This is the core value that is lifted up in the Christian church, Disciples of Christ. We say that unity is our polar star. It's our core value. Unity, not uniformity. And that's, I think, why the table is the center of our worship, why it is the center of our life together. Our unity comes from Christ, not from all of us thinking alike, or having the same political or theological ideology, or being passionate about the same ministries within the church, or being gifted with the same gifts for ministry. In all of our wonderful diversity, it is the table that symbolizes our unity. On those hot July disciple history tours with the youth, there was one thing that always brought us together, and it happened without fail. One time, that even when we were at our wits' end with each other, that I could catch even the smallest glimpse of the church as it will one day completely be. And that was at mealtime. And mealtime usually happened on the side of the road at a rest area picnic table. Peanut butter and jelly, sandwiches, bread, chips, milk, juice boxes. There were simple elements. But even in those moments, it never failed. Even if people had become agitated with one another on a van, they all somehow left that aside and were able to come together and help feed each other. Without my having to ask, they would form stations. Some would take the bread and put 2 pieces on a plate and pass it down, and others would skillfully, or not so skillfully, spread the peanut butter onto the bread. And then there were those who stationed themselves at the jelly station. Grape jelly or strawberry jelly or honey, and ask people which one do you want, because after all we can't even agree on jelly. So they would ask what others wanted, and always there would be people who would drag the big heavy coolers out so that we all had enough to drink, and always someone would end up at the end of the station with the napkins, handing those out to every person in those brief moments. Humility, gentleness, patience, they took over. And we lived with one another in love. I can visualize Paul sitting down in a hole that would have been his jail cell, writing words. Dear church, you are not finished yet. Because let's face it, humility, gentleness, patience, and bearing with one another in love, they take a lifetime of growth to live out fully. And so I imagine that embedded in all the wordy instruction in his letter is the phrase running through his mind, keep on practicing. Church, keep on practicing. I beg you to lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called. Church, keep on practicing. And because it's hard work, take time to gather together for a family meal. That it might give you strength to grow into the full stature of Christ. When push comes to shove, church, remember that you've been given a place and a way to know that you all belong together because you all belong to God. We all belong to God. And so we have a place where we can come and gather. A place where we can remember. A place where we can practice. So let us prepare to come to the table together and practice our faith.